When we think about the start of World War I, it almost feels like it was bound to happen, right? Like some unavoidable catastrophe. But the truth is, it's a lot more complicated. It's a story about simmering tensions, tangled alliances, and most importantly, a string of absolutely disastrous decisions. So let's untangle this chain of events that sent an entire continent into chaos. This right here, this quote from Germany's chancellor, pretty much says it all. It captures the sheer confusion after all the dominoes had fallen. You see, this wasn't some grand master plan unfolding perfectly. It was a complete mess, a cascade of miscalculations made by leaders who totally lost control of the monster they helped create. So, to really get how this all went down, here's our roadmap. We're going to start with a single event that lit the fuse. Then we'll back up and look at the setup, the alliances, the long-running rivalries. We'll track the unbelievably fast escalation, check out how historians have argued over who's to blame, and then we'll try to answer that big question for ourselves. Okay, so our story really kicks off on June 28, 1914. We're in Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia, and something that happens here is going to give a lot of powerful people the very excuse they've been looking for. The assassination of the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, was the match that lit the fire. But you have to understand, Europe was already a giant powder keg, just waiting for a spark. The assassination didn't cause the war, it just gave Austria-Hungary the perfect pretext to finally go after its troublesome neighbor, Serbia. So what was this powder keg made of? Well, a huge part of it was this system of alliances that had basically sliced Europe into two rival teams. So, on one side, you had the Triple Alliance, with Germany and Austria-Hungary as the main players. And on the other, you had the Triple Entente, which tied together France, Russia, and Great Britain. Now, these weren't just friendly handshakes. They created a tripwire system. A fight between two of them could drag everybody else in. A little squabble in the Balkans could suddenly become everyone's war. And these alliances didn't exist in a vacuum. They were wrapped up in this whole web of deep-seated rivalries, fears, and ambitions that were just pushing the whole continent closer and closer to the brink. Just look at this list of anxieties. You've got Britain, an island nation, freaking out about Germany building a huge navy. You've got France, still furious about losing the territory of Alsace-Lorraine. Then there's Germany, feeling paranoid and trapped between France and Russia. And, crucially, you have Austria-Hungary looking at Serbian nationalism and seeing a threat to its very existence. So much so that people in Vienna were starting to think a preventive war was the only way out. And underneath all this political drama was a massive economic shift. I mean, this chart tells a huge story. Look at Germany's industrial might. By 1914, it was outproducing Britain in steel, which was a huge deal. It was a direct challenge to the old world order. Now, yeah, the USA was already in its own league, but inside Europe, this power shift was creating some serious friction. You know, the decade before the war was basically a series of dress rehearsals. Every crisis you see here in Morocco, in Bosnia, it pushed everyone right to the edge, but they always pulled back. The Balkan Wars, though, were a really bad sign. They made Serbia stronger and more ambitious, which in turn made Austria-Hungary more desperate than ever to put them in their place, for good. Which brings us to that fateful summer of 1914. After the assassination, everything just spiraled. Diplomacy completely failed, and this rigid, almost automatic chain reaction took over. So what was the real tipping point? It was this. This right here. Germany gave Austria-Hungary what we now call the blank check. It was basically a promise saying, whatever you decide to do to Serbia, we've got your back no matter what. This was a colossal miscalculation. It gave Austria zero reason to be moderate and massively upped the chances that Russia, Serbia's big protector, would get involved. And with that German guarantee, the dominoes fell with a speed that is just mind-boggling. Austria declares war, Russia starts mobilizing its massive army to defend Serbia, and back then, mobilization, calling up all your soldiers, was basically seen as the first act of war. So Germany sees Russia mobilizing, sees it as a direct threat, and declares war on them. Then its own rigid war plan kicks in, and it declares war on France and marches into Belgium. And that's the move that brings the British Empire into the fight. 1 week. It took just 1 week to go from a local crisis to a world war. So why was everything so rigid? You can thank the Schlieffen Plan. This was Germany's master plan, and it was a logistical beast built on a fatal assumption that to beat Russia, you had to knock out France first, and fast. The whole thing was based on intricate railway timetables. It was a trap. Once mobilization was ordered, the military machine just took over. There was no pause button. Mobilization was war. So, with all of this going on, the alliances, the rivalries, these inflexible plans, you have to ask, who was actually responsible? Well, for more than 100 years, historians have been fighting over that very question. The debate gets pretty heated. You have the historian Fritz Fischer, who made a powerful case that Germany's leaders basically planned this war on purpose to grab world power and unite the country. But then you have others, like A.J.P. Taylor, who said, no, it was the darn timetables. They blame the rigid military plans that left no room for talk. And there's another really compelling argument that German generals, terrified of Russia's growing army, decided to launch a preventive war while they still had a chance to win. And if you need evidence for that preventive war theory, just look at this quote. It's absolutely chilling. This is from the head of the German army, Helmuth von Moltke. It shows you the mindset of the top brass. For them, war wasn't a last resort. It was a necessary, maybe even desirable step to secure Germany's future before their enemies got too powerful. Okay, so let's try and pull all these threads together. What we're seeing is a story of deliberate gambles, really deep-seated fears, and a whole series of terrible errors in judgment. And in the end, we're left with this one giant question. Was this a calculated power grab by Germany, like Fischer said? Or was it just a tragedy of miscalculation, where leaders on every side just stumbled into a catastrophe they never truly understood until it was way too late? You know, the evidence really points to a toxic mix of both. It was a war born from ambition and fear and a complete and utter failure of leadership. The dominoes didn't fall because of destiny. They fell because men pushed them.